Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome, everyone, to Sports Spectrum's podcast. I'm Jason Romano. Today on the show, we welcome Danielle Scott. She's a five-time Olympic volleyball player who played her college volleyball at Long Beach State University, the 1993 National Player of the Year, 1993 National Champion as well at Long Beach State, and a five-time Olympian participating in the 1996, 2000, 2004, 2008, and 2012 Summer Olympics. She's a two-time silver medalist for USA Volleyball and holds the U.S. female volleyball athlete record for Olympic appearances, culminating in 2016 with an induction into the International Volleyball Hall of Fame. And this podcast consists of a conversation with Danielle about her volleyball career. But really, we wanted to talk to Danielle about forgiveness, about faith in Christ, about trusting in God when things don't go the way we would hope. It was November 18th in Danielle's hometown of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when an altercation took place. The unthinkable happened, and Danielle's sister was murdered. And Danielle, who had arrived on the scene, had moved to try and shield her sister, but it wasn't enough. And unfortunately, Stefanie, her sister, was pronounced dead on the scene. And Danielle suffered injuries herself. She was rushed to the hospital with wounds to both of her palms and her left thigh, her knee, and her lower leg. And her niece also had suffered minor injuries. And Danielle's hands were really affected in her palms for a while. For 6 weeks, she couldn't even use her hands or her legs. And this podcast, this interview with Danielle, it's very brave of her to come forward and talk about this. This is domestic violence at its worst level. And Danielle survived. Her sister did not. And now Danielle wants to keep her sister's name alive. And she wants to come out and talk and share about forgiveness, about the Lord working in her life and God's faithfulness and trusting in a loving and caring God during a very, very difficult time in her life and losing her sister. This is a powerful episode. It really is. And please take a listen to the courage of Danielle Scott, five-time Olympic volleyball player, here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Danielle, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Danielle. So good to have you here, and grateful that you are here on the show. Your story is an interesting one. It's taken you to many places, hills, valleys. Let's start with some of the hills, I guess, and the accomplishments that you've gone through in your journey as one of the great volleyball players of all time, 1993 National Volleyball Player of the Year and a national champion, certainly the Summer Olympics, a two-time silver medalist. Take us back maybe to the moment when volleyball truly became a passion for you, when you realized this is something I want to pursue.
Wow. Well, an exact moment, I'm not sure if I know the exact moment. I actually was blessed to play several different sports, and I really think that a lot of athletes and kids growing up, they should try a lot of different sports. I did volleyball, basketball, softball, track and field. And I actually went through college with both volleyball and basketball. And then I finally did a semester of track and field before I was invited out to the national team. But I guess, coming from being super shy and quiet, finding my way into sports is one thing that kind of allowed me to grow just as a person and just feel like connected to a group. And I think volleyball stood out in all of those more than the others, just from the team aspect. Like, you can go out and have your own skills and be great, but you can't be great alone. You need your teammates. And that's what I really liked about volleyball. So I guess if I had to pick a moment that I thought, oh, wow, I might be good at this, was when I started hearing that. So from other people, it would have been around my junior year. I started club volleyball my sophomore year in high school which is relatively late compared to now kids starting as tots, right? But I started hearing a buzz like my junior year, like, whoa, you think you might try out for the 92 Olympics? I was like, whoa, is that a possibility? So I kind of borrowed that kind of vision until I actually felt, that could be something that could become a reality for me.
Now, I know I read that you had some, I don't know if we'll say cup of coffee, but some tryouts, if you will, with the WNBA. So basketball, sport that you also enjoyed?
Yeah, so basketball, I'd been like several years out of collegiate competition. So I think maybe 7 years when the WNBA came about. And I had a few tryouts, tried out with the Sparks, and then I actually was named to the Portland Fire training team, and they cut me right before the preseason game and said, I need to go back and get stats. But ultimately, I'd already had one Olympics under my belt. I said, okay, I guess I'll stay in that lane and kind of pursue that. But I enjoyed basketball. I enjoyed all the sports that I played. And in fact, I just try to give my daughter that same experience, playing a lot of different sports and even getting into the arts with drama and piano. I think it's just important just in development.
Absolutely. Let them get their hands in a lot of different cookie jars, as I like to say. When we talk, Danielle, up to elite athletes, and obviously you're one of those, the best in their craft, when they always come on the show, they always talk about how it's not the accolades or the titles or the accomplishments that they most remember. It's the training, the journey, the relationships. For you, what do you most appreciate now when you think back on your volleyball career?
In fact, that is so true. I was just inducted into some Hall of Fame, like 2 in 1 year. Yeah. And, you're asked, like, how does it feel to accomplish this? And it's not something you really think about when you're going through the process, when you found what I feel is something you're passionate about. You just, like, for me, it was about connecting with people, the teammates and friends that I made through playing volleyball, being able to travel the world, experiencing different cultures. I've learned, different languages. I speak Portuguese most fluently, but I speak some Italian. I know some Japanese phrases. So it's always nice to encounter people and be able to at least throw out some phrases that, kind of bridge the gap, in communication or just, little fun things like that. And so I think those are probably the bigger things. And then now being able to have my daughter travel with me as I move into more of the coaching side of the game. My daughter gets to travel with me, and then we'll explore the city, and she'll get to see some volleyball, and she'll meet new people. And unlike my quiet, shy self at her age, she's got this blossoming and blooming personality that I think you just kind of get that enrichment as you explore and experience different, have different experiences. And sports has really done a lot of that for me.
Danielle Scott's our guest here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. 5-time Olympic volleyball player. Yes, 5 times. So I can't ask you about every Olympics because there's 5 of them and we'd need a whole nother hour probably just to talk about your Olympic experiences. 2-time silver medalist. If you could pick one memory, this is a hard one here because you've been into so many different Olympics and had so many great memories, I'm sure, in volleyball. But what memory stands out of the 5 Olympics that you got to participate in that just is one that you want to tell other people, share, whatever? What's a memory that stands out?
Yeah, you're right. That's a really tough one. I have actually gotten pretty good in condensing like what they all kind of meant to me through. But I guess if I have to say just one, I'll tell 2. Sure. So in 2008, we were not ranked super high. We were in China, the home country of our coach Long Ping. And I remember to advance to the next round, we had to win this match against Italy. And I wasn't directly the one who made all the efforts. It's always a team effort. But I remember Lindsey Berg coming in, serving like 6 jump serves. I was at the net, so I could do my part up there. But she made it so much more easy with those consistent jump serves. It was so tough, and we kind of pulled our way back and won that set, won that match, and then we went on to win our silver. So that was fun. And then in 2012, just the grit in making those games is a great memory. Like, I was getting hit left and right with no's and not yets. I just come back from having my daughter. And if you know volleyball and a national team and how that kind of flows, you kind of know when you're in the door and when you're not quite there. And so seeing that, it was like a real battle. I had my mom praying for me. I was working, really hard after practice, after hours. So we'd have our morning practices, and then I'd go and do like a third practice. So just making that team was a challenge. And so that's a great memory. And just that I could now see and be able to share that experience with others on the team in terms of being the veteran player, being able to talk to the younger ones and helping them through difficult times. But I guess really nice was to, after the games and when we had our day off and time to spend with friends and family, the P&G house was amazing. So being able to have my daughter run to my arms, she was 2, and share that time with family was really special as well.
That's so cool. Danielle Scott's our guest here on Sports Spectrum. We love to talk about testimonies from the people that we interview. This is sports and faith intersecting here at Sports Spectrum. So share with us your testimony. I know the Lord means a lot to you and he's a big part of your life. Share with us that time when God became real to you.
Well, I always, am forever grateful for my mom, who was a strong woman of God. Like, she was always that example before me. I was baptized really young. I was 9 years old when I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And pretty much throughout my life, I've been connected. Obviously, as I grew older, I learned more about what that relationship meant in terms of, reading the Word and connecting with others and having a prayer team around me. And so, like I mentioned with the 2012, when it looked like nothing was going to work. Like, I was told no and not yet so often, I was able to keep believing and not lose doubt in myself, because I felt that God had a plan for me. It shifted throughout my career in terms of what my role was in volleyball. But beyond that, I was one of the ones who would lead in our prayer before games. And so just to be able to share my faith in that way. And then even some of the conversations that would be held, because people knew, where I stood in terms of my faith and my beliefs, some of those conversations weren't held around me. Right. But I've always been able to find a place to be in communion, whether I was international or here traveling in different states. So that's really important to me. And it's been a real foundation and anchor in my life when I do have difficult challenges, or when my daughter has difficulties that she's going through. I can point her to, God, to Jesus, the one who ultimately what he says about us is what matters.
How were you able to navigate that as an Olympic athlete, an elite athlete, 5 times we talked about at the Olympics, and still stay grounded in your faith? You talk about sort of being able to have conversations with people because your faith allowed you to kind of be a witness, I guess, for Christ, and have those conversations with people that maybe differ in beliefs. So what did that look like for you throughout your career and even through the Olympics, and staying grounded, keeping that connection with the Lord?
I think as long as you're being yourself, you're being authentic, and you're not like trying to push your faith and beliefs onto people, but just sharing your experiences and the things that I've seen happen in my life, it left it easy for people to hear things that I might have to say. And again, I'm blessed to be in a sport and on teams where there were actually several other Christians on the team. And so I think there becomes that kind of feeling and vibe that's there and present. And people wonder, what's different about you, or how you're able to be strong or be able to be positive through things. And And I can always say it's that because I know who I am in Christ. It wasn't always easy, like to hear the no's and things, but having that hope in that Jesus provides for you is something that everyone should have in order to make it through like difficult times, or even when you achieve something great, like be grateful for what you have accomplished and what you're able to do and what you're able to give and how you're able to serve versus what you're not able to do.
Danielle, you've mentioned these difficult times a few times here in our interview thus far, those hills and valleys, as I like to call it, that wonderful song by Torrin Wells, and the trials that all of us face in life, no matter if you're a Christian or not. You experienced unthinkable tragedy, I guess, in a lot of ways. November 18th, 2018, we wrote about this at sportspectrum.com, and I just want to ask you, to the extent that you can talk about it and you are willing to share, can you tell us about that? And then I really just want to dive in from a faith perspective on trying to get through this, but share with us a little bit on what happened to whatever extent you can share.
Well, as it's kind of been disclosed, it was my sister's estranged husband who just attacked us, really. There were some... obviously she was getting divorced from him, and I can't really say a whole lot into his thoughts.
Right.
But ultimately his rage overcame him, and he attacked my sister. And in the scuffle and struggle of trying to help and do what I could in the situation, I received like a cut on both my hands, on my left hand. Had some nerve damage, had a cut on my arm, and 3 stab wounds to the leg and the upper leg, the lower leg, and my knee. So at one point I ended up passing out from the loss of blood. And then, the ambulance came and was in the hospital, eventually had surgery. And I just know that afterwards, when you're going through that and just calling out Jesus and like not knowing, why this is all happening.
Yeah.
I know afterwards, going through the surgery and the time that I couldn't really pray for myself, I saw so many emails and texts and messages and prayers of support that was super amazing. And it's kind of this inexplicable type of, comfort or relief that everything was going to be okay, even in the midst of like not knowing what my life was going to look like afterwards. Like my hands is something that I use, for sports, in my work I work with a financial company, just typing up an application, just being able to walk and, not knowing what life was going to look like. I knew that I was going to be okay. So as soon as I was able to move and get around, of course, I felt like everything, not necessarily what happened to my sister, of course, but in terms of me stopping and being forced to stop, that even was for a reason, Yeah. And so basically, just trying to get on and not trying, getting on and moving, keeping moving forward, keeping focusing on something positive has been what I've been doing.
Mm-hmm. I know it was a while. I think it was 6 weeks. For 6 weeks after everything that happened, you couldn't use your hands or your legs. You couldn't really care for yourself, even your daughter, who you've talked so much about. Tell me about the emotions there from recovering. Obviously, you're also recovering from the loss of your sister as well, but physically and emotionally trying to recover, and your faith and staying strong, because I love what you said. I really do. And I don't know how people can go through tragedy without a faith in God. But I know that it's not easy when you're in the midst of it to still trust that there is a plan and that God is working everything for the good when you just went through such a difficult experience. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, recovery was quite interesting. Like you get when you go through like injuries that I had or something that's life altering. So in particular, my injuries, like it was really humbling. Like not being able. Can you imagine not being able to use both your hands?
Yeah,
Like
I
I
can't.
was so dependent again, right? And so little things I celebrated when I could actually get in the shower with my sleeves
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
the shower sleeves. I was like, oh, yay, this feels so great. You take things for granted that you don't typically think about. My dad, actually, I had this kind of modified walker. And, older people usually use the walkers, and you'll see the little tennis balls on the end. And, I'm already tall. And when I would come through the room to go to therapy, you would hear this, like you can hear me coming a mile away, right? And so my dad ended up putting these souped up wheels on the bottom of it. And so, we joked about how now I can run when I was still kind of walking, but, it kind of, making light of some of the things and being able to laugh and smile and find some positivity in it is really, what's helped me and not sulking in it. But I mean, also other little things, you have a whole different perspective and appreciation. I remember actually being in church, and the pastor usually says, like, turn around and give, your neighbor a high five. And at the time, I had both my hands were like in these splits. And so I didn't really have a hand. And so people kind of looked away and around and didn't touch me. So it kind of gave me appreciation of like my awareness to how I respond to someone who might be disabled or if you will. And I thought about, okay, well, if I'm ever in the situation, then, maybe I'll put a hand on the shoulder, just to think of a perspective of what I could do and learn from the situation that I was in. But again, I think just, I don't know if I'm weird like that. I just think I have a covering that allows me to kind of find something positive in whenever I'm going through. And of course I'm human. Of course I cry. I mean, even starting to think about the emotional side of it, I get a little choked up.
Yeah.
But I'm human. I cry, but it's not about not crying or not feeling. You have to experience that, feel it, but you can't stay there. Yeah. That's the part where people get in trouble. Like they stay in whatever whatever thing that's made them not feel good or whatever setbacks they might have and take that type of woe is me mindset. No, okay, this has happened, but what can I do next? How can I do something better or more positive out of it? And in fact, through this, I've learned a lot about enough, not a lot. There's so much more to know and explore about domestic violence. All the signs that I missed. And, just in that alone, just being aware and more present and listen more and see more. We get caught up, like we'll have family gatherings and stuff, but sometimes, one person might be watching TV, someone else may be on the phone, but how about taking that time and just really have a conversation, really, really check in on how people are doing, how your loved ones, how your friends are doing versus the surface kind of generic, like, how are you?
I know you had some close friendships too, including some of your former Team USA teammates that came and supported you and were there for you. Tell me about that. You said you got a lot of outreach and emails, but actually having community when you're walking through grief and recovery, that's vital, isn't it?
It is. And, my dad gave up, everything. He came and lived with me. Like the person was on the run for over a month. And just imagine that even though I'm trusting in God, that kind of looking over the shoulder kind of fear, like, okay, what's going to happen next? Like, so my dad, he came and lived with me for a month. My friend from New York, she came down, first flight, was there. Taiba, like multiple phone calls and conversations. She started the GoFund to help with, medical and the time that I couldn't work and for the family. So she was very instrumental. Just other friends, it was a tough situation, so people didn't really know when to call or not. But I still could feel the presence, or they would communicate through one another, or just reading. I was without my phone for 2 weeks, so my niece had my phone because hers was taken in possession for evidence.
Right.
And so for 2 weeks, I didn't have the phone. So I wasn't even aware, physically knowing who was necessarily reaching out to me. But, again, I could feel a presence. That was great.
That's so good. I know you also posted on Instagram, I should say Twitter, I'm sorry. It says in Psalms 105, "For the Lord is good, his unfailing love continues forever, and his faithfulness continues to each generation." Tell me about, from being a person of faith, we're called to forgive, right? Every time that we're wronged. I wrote a book on forgiveness. I know how hard forgiving is, but as humans, this is one of the more difficult things that we can walk through. And I call it a process when I talk about forgiveness. What was that like for you, the process of forgiving, someone who hurt you and hurt people that you love? And yet, as Christians, somehow Jesus does that for us every day. Can you walk through that process of forgiveness a little bit?
Yeah. And I tell you, I talk about my daughter because, it's me and her, she and I.
Yeah.
And, she said a prayer right after, when things were really raw. And she said this prayer Lord, help him to not hurt others because he's hurting. And it's wow, what wisdom from a child.
Incredible.
And it's tough. Forgiveness is tough.
Yeah.
But it's not, because Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice, and knowing that he will be the final judge. Obviously today, I want justice to be what it is. And I think he should not be free.
Of course.
But in terms of forgiveness, Jesus forgave me, for all of my sins, and he continues to forgive when we fall short, no matter what that sin is. If it's a bad thought, if it is in fact an action, he says that no sin is greater than the other.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of called to forgive, and it comes in its timing. And I think each time I just, have to, when I have, the thoughts of whatever, I just have to pray and ask God to work and move in me. And he does that through, my daughter. He does that through other people. And I know that there are many who have suffered a lot worse than what I have. I just read an article about a young boy, 20 years old. He was taken from his mom in an accident, so it's a different loss, but it's a loss of her child. And so I think we just have to just live in grace. And when we do that, then the forgiveness, I think, it'll happen, over time.
Yeah. I always say it's a process. And I also say, I love what you said about the justice side of it, because I always say it doesn't let the other person off the hook for what they've done. When we forgive, when we choose to forgive, it's actually for us. We're the ones that are free and experience a freedom, because when we don't forgive, I believe it keeps each of us individually in bondage. And that's the hard thing about forgiveness, I think, and walking through that in terms of how that is. Today, Danielle, how are you doing physically today? How's your recovery been? It's been, I don't even know, 7-8 months or so removed from that day in November of 2018. How are you doing physically?
It's been about 7 months, and
Yep.
my recovery has gone well. I'll still have some limitations. I actually got to play. I do this annual tournament, Steve Warren and the Exterminators. He allows me to be player coach and help the players there, and I get to step on the court here and there.
That's cool.
And I played in my first tournament in May. And, well, I had a great set and a half. So that's a process too. So I definitely have to get in better physical shape. But in terms of the injuries, I'm dealing with a meniscus tear in my knee, and some of that's probably something from a bowl that was discovered now. But my hands, like, they kind of swole up, but I think it's part of the process of just getting back into using them as well. My knees swole up too. But overall, physically, I'm doing a lot better. I mean, if you just look at me, I'm moving, I can jump, I can set the ball. I can do a lot of my regular activities, but obviously the scars would be there as a reminder. I mean, I think for my hands, if I were to know what arthritis felt like, I think this might be somewhat it, because there's a stiffness. I still have some numbness from the nerve damage. But for all practical things, I'm not really limited. So yes.
You mentioned it's been 7 months. I wonder how much the USA Today article, I think, was the point that we saw where, there was, it kind of came out publicly and we shared it on Sports Spectrum and certainly now the podcast, but talking about it and kind of seeing purpose, I guess, in the pain. Are you able to see that now in terms of being able to share the story with the masses, speak, anything like that you can actually encourage people with your pain being used for a purpose?
I definitely do see that, with domestic violence, there's 1 in 20 women, I think, something like that. And then I don't know the exact number for men who are affected by, domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Yeah. And just being able to share that, for instance, I was given the Courage Award back in May as well. And sharing my story, there were 2 women who I spoke with afterwards, and they were able to tell me, some of what they were going through. And I think talking about it is part of the recovery as well. And even in my Olympic experience, sharing the stories that I went through, the ups and downs, and now, this very hard life experience. I actually lost my mom in 2015. Just being able to share on, loss of someone who's close to you, loss of someone in this domestic violence, it helps others to see, like, she's okay. So, maybe I can do some of the things that she's doing, or everyone's going to be different, but be able to know that, life, there's something good still in life, and that there's purpose in everything. We just have to figure out, what that is, be open to even explore what those are. And I think for me, sharing my sister's story is going to keep her name alive, that her death wasn't in vain, right? Yeah. And that's, that's something that I can do, try to use the platform that I have to share with people, to make people aware again of just having those conversations, and that this is like a growing travesty in our state that is so great, this domestic violence.
Danielle, this has been great. Thank you so much for the courage to share your story. Last question here. We ask this to all of our guests. I'm curious what your answer will be. What is God teaching you today? What are you learning from the Lord where he has you today versus 7 months ago versus 5, 10, 15 years ago? What are you learning from God today?
What am I learning from God today? I think just my personal growth in him. I need to continue in that walk. That everything I do is bigger than me. That, it's not about what I can do, but how I can serve and help others. And so that's really what I would like to do, just be used as a vessel to help others through what I'm going through. Like I said, I work with financial services, just giving the information. I feel rewarded in that, like financial literacy, in being able to connect with the kids when I'm coaching. That's my way of giving back and being used and being an example of him. And so just being open to be used by him, to be that vehicle, even if it's uncomfortable sometimes.
That's really good. She is Danielle Scott, 5-time Olympic volleyball player. Thanks so much, Danielle, for your courage, really. And I do appreciate it. And I know it's going to help. If it helps one person, it was worth talking about it. That's always how I feel about any of the trials that I've gone through in my life. We'll be praying for you and your family, certainly, and we wish you nothing but the best. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I think I messed up on that average. I think the average was something like nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused. And then it was 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience domestic violence. So I want to make that correction.
Yeah. I mean, those numbers are really shocking to me. And sad at the same time. But hopefully this brings some awareness to that. And certainly your story can really help a lot of people. I believe that. Thanks so much, Danielle.
Thank you, Jason.
Many thanks to Danielle Scott for being here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. That was a hard interview for me to do. I remember asking her after we finished the taping if I crossed any lines. I wanted to apologize. I certainly wasn't trying to make her uncomfortable in any way. I just feel when people are ready to share their story, that it's important to share it when we know it can help others. And I truly believe Danielle's words were beautiful in a lot of ways. And what she said, to enter into a place of forgiveness, to still trusting God when it doesn't make sense, to wrap her arms around not only Jesus, but her community of people, her family, her friends, and to allow herself to mourn and to grieve. I just thought those words were beautiful, and I don't know who's listening right now. I don't know which person is tuning into this podcast at this moment that needed to hear that, but I know somebody needed to hear what Danielle said on this podcast. So I'm really, truly thankful to Danielle Scott for sharing her story, and just wish her nothing but the best, continuing to pray for her and her family, certainly as they continue to grieve. It's only been 7-8 months since the incident, November 18th, 2018. And, moving forward, that's what I like to say, just moving forward, not forgetting, but moving forward. Please give Danielle a follow on Twitter and let her know you're praying for her, letting her know you're thinking about her. Her Twitter handle is dscott, ARRUDA, dscott, ARRUDA. And let her know you're praying for her. I'm sure she would love to hear from you. So thanks to Danielle for being here on the show. And thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. For more stories like this on the intersection of sports and faith, you can check out our website, sportspectrum.com. You can also read the article that we wrote a couple months ago on Danielle. If you just search her name over at sportspectrum.com, and we'll also link to that article in our podcast post on the website, sportspectrum.com. Thanks for listening. We love you guys. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time with a brand new episode on Sports Spectrum's podcast.